Welcome back, everyone. So today we're talking about something that I think we all need to hear, myself included, and it's not talked about enough. We talk so much about food and nutrition and what diet's best and eat this, exercise that, whatever, in order to stay healthy. And I think in this point of the game, we all know that eating right is definitely what we should be doing. And for the most part, we know what to eat, even though there's like thousands of different diets out there. But we know that eating healthy is the way to go. But why then is it so hard for some people to stick with it? And that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about getting in touch with those hunger signals, getting in touch with that emotional eating side, and just diving deep. And I've got the expert in that, Eve Lahijani. Hopefully I said that right. She is a registered she's nodding at me, yes. She is a registered dietitian, nutritionist, TEDx speaker, and self-proclaimed foodie. Her gift lies in helping her audiences and clients make behavior change simple and second nature. These practical modifications lead to big results in improved health, heightened mental clarity, enhanced stamina, and increased overall effectiveness. Eve specializes in helping those who engage in emotional eating, compulsive eating, and other forms of non-hunger eating, as well as anorexia and bulimia. Eve is passionate about helping women listen to their bodies, trust their hunger, and make peace with food. So welcome, Eve.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yay! So I found Eve through actually a TEDx talk. I was, searching out the internet for the next best speaker, and I always go to TEDx, and I loved what you had to say, and I loved your story. So if we could just start there so that people could kind of hear where you came from, because it hasn't always been easy for you, has it?
Oh, absolutely not. I came from the world of dieting and restricting, which always led to binging and overeating. So I was always between one extreme to another. Either I was restrictive, avoiding food for several days, eating very little, or as I would call it, off track, completely binging, out of control. And it was kind of like a torture going back and forth. I followed so many diets, like the cabbage soup, the water diet, low carb, low fat, high protein. I mean, I could go on and on. They have different names nowadays, but I tried so many things, and it often left me feeling so defeated emotionally and physically. Often I had no energy, totally bloated and uncomfortable, and just so out of tune with myself and my body. So it was just a hard existence to have for many years.
Yeah, absolutely. I could say the same for my story. Like I feel like I tried every diet. I didn't try the cabbage soup diet, but I did try everything else under the sun, right? And I think most women will say, hey, yeah, that was me too. So what finally happened in order to change that behavior?
Well, I wish I could say it was just one thing. I mean, this had been going on for years, but I think what changed, like what started the shift, was one night I was at a friend's house. But just before getting there, I was so scared. I mean, the whole day leading up to going to my friend's house, I was so scared to go to her house. I was scared because of the food that was going to be there.
Wow.
So, because I knew her mom was a great cook, and I was just afraid of how full I was going to be at the end of the meal. And sure enough, I overate that night again. And I was just so uncomfortable in my clothes. Like my pants were squeezing me so tight, that feeling of like overeating. It was hard for me to breathe. And I was just so full. I took space. I went into somebody's bedroom, and I just like sat there for a while looking up at the popcorn ceiling, just so upset. Like I did it again. Like I was so dreading that something like this would happen. And there I was, overly full again. And I was crying, and I was like, you know what? I will do whatever it takes to handle this, to heal this. And if and when I do, I'm going to make it my mission to help other people handle and heal this as well. So that's why I'm so passionate about what I do. And I love to say that, yeah, and so I stopped dieting, and I I got my master's in nutrition so I could find out all of the right calculations of exactly the way I'm supposed to eat. And I have to say, it almost made matters worse because now I had an official license telling me exactly how to restrict and how to not listen to myself using like these elaborate calculations. And it wasn't until years after grad school, actually, as I started to have the courage to start listening to myself. When I started to feel my feelings and when I was no longer willing to punish myself if my eating didn't go right, that I started to see things transform. So when I was no longer willing to reject myself because of how I was feeling or how I was eating, I saw something else open up. I started to cultivate a relationship with my body, and a relationship with myself.
Mm-hmm. I think we get so, I mean, I get this all the time where people are like, well, what about the calories? What about the macros? And so many women get so wrapped up in those numbers, which is so unrealistic. It just makes me so mad because it's like, no, you guys have to understand that every one of us is going to need a different amount of calories, a different amount of carbs. It's all going to be different depending on your gut health, your, how much you exercise and everything like that. And we get so outside of our body that people are stopping and they're not listening to what's actually going on. And you talk a lot about what's something called non-hunger eating. So can you tell us a little bit about what non-hunger eating is?
Yeah, of course I can. But before that, I mean, what you were saying was so speaking to my heart. I'd love to say something
Yeah.
about that. Just because as women, we're brought up to listen to everybody, that we don't know what's best for ourselves. I think this is also what's showing up with our food and eating. We
Yeah.
don't believe that we could have our own answers. So we look to calculations and numbers and all these things, which are never going to be as accurate as your own hunger and fullness. So that's what I love empowering women to do, to go within and find out their own truth of how hungry they are, if they're hungry at all. So when it comes to non-hunger eating, you got to know what your hunger feels like. You got to also know, and this is what I really help women really understand and get so good at. They get so good at understanding their hunger and feeling it and knowing how to address it. Also getting really good at knowing their satisfaction, what that feels like, and how to stop when they're comfortably satisfied. That if they were trying to force feed themselves to eat for another feeling, like a sadness or boredom, their body would actually reject it because they got so good at listening to their hunger, so good at listening to their fullness. So also what my clients cultivate, and also what I spend years learning how to cultivate, is the capacity to feel the things like boredom, or what it feels like to be resentful or annoyed or excited or angry. So really, the way to work with that non-hunger eating is to start to develop a mastery. It really is a mastery around what it feels like to be you.
Wow. Yeah, I absolutely. I love that because, and it's something, and like I said, it's not easy. I remember my own journey and I was well into like eating well and being healthy and I had no, addictions around food. And one day it dawned on me that I didn't need to eat the whole steak. Like it was like the weirdest thing, but it was like, actually, I just need to eat half and I'm totally fine with that. Like I don't need to eat the whole thing, but how it just, when we just don't realize what we're doing, we're so out of tune with our body, right? And I think all the calorie counting and stuff, when you were talking about it, I was thinking in my head, I think a lot of women, they feel they need to do that because it gives them a sense of control, because they don't feel in control when they're listening to their body, because to them they're just going, yeah, but when all I feel is that I need to eat sugar or I need to eat the carb and I can't stop, and it's that emotional eating, and that calorie counting makes them feel like they've got some control over those feelings on the inside.
Exactly. It's so interesting that oftentimes when people's lives feel out of control, what they like to do is to control their eating and their exercise. They start to get rigid about their exercise plan. They start to get rigid about their eating plan. Their eating plan. And a lot of people say, well, I wish I had that problem, or isn't it good that I'm doing that? The problem with that, the real big issue with that, is once stress hits a higher threshold, And it will for this person because they never learn how to cope in the first place. So once stress hits a higher threshold for this person is more likely to use food compulsively or to use food emotionally to help them feel better. Because at once they used it to make them feel safe, but the way they were rigid with it, they used that as a way of safety. Now that food gains in emotional appeal. So when stress hits a higher threshold, they're more likely to use that food emotionally. So people who engage in this rigidity or using food as control, that might work in the short run, but in the long run, that actually lends its way to compulsive eating or more emotional eating, because now the food has a special meaning and now the food works emotionally. For people who never restricted, food doesn't really work emotionally because it doesn't have that charge.
Right. And do you find, like, in your practice and when you work with women, that a lot of it comes from childhood stuff? Like, is it a lifetime of these repetitive behaviors that kind of get ingrained in our head to use food as an emotional tool?
Oh my goodness, absolutely. So we talk about childhood patterns. What was food like in the house? What were your parents' relationship with food? Those are all things to consider. And surprisingly, a lot of the issue comes from the diets that they put themselves on thereafter.
Yes.
Because I found that dieting actually lends its way to more compulsive eating and more emotional eating for a variety of reasons. I mean, humans are not meant to be restricted when it comes to food and eating. I like to explain that, like, as your eating is like kind of on a pendulum, right? And if somebody gets too restrictive with themselves, it's only a matter of time until that pendulum swings back. And there's a name for it. It's called diet backlash. So the better somebody is at restricting and depriving themselves, just like a pendulum, there's an equal or greater push back into binging out of control. We might justify it by saying, like, I've been really good, or I deserve this. That's just the pendulum swinging back. And that's a really big reason why diets backfire, is that people are doing this swinging back and forth. And it could be such a scary place. I mean, there's several reasons why diets backfire, like metabolically, what happens to the metabolism. But a lot of it also has to do with the relationship with food.
Yeah.
After all, when you go on a diet, it's almost the game, to ignore your body as much as you can, to ignore that hunger feeling, right?
Mm-hmm.
The flip side of that is, as people get good at ignoring their hunger, they also get good at ignoring their fullness, because they're training themselves to ignore their body. And so that's another big problem with dieting, is it creates a disconnect between the mind and the body.
Yeah, I remember growing up too, like, I don't know about you, but I was in the household that you finished everything on your plate. Like, my mom would make us sit there for sometimes an hour, 2 hours, whatever it was, until everything was gone off the plate. And that's like burned in my brain. It took me a long time to get rid of that, belief, the limiting belief system of you have to finish everything. And it makes us overeat. I always make sure now with my own kids that I'm like, okay, if you're full, stop eating.
Your kids are so lucky to have a mom like you, really. Yeah.
Yes, because we have to teach our kids. And I think a lot of the generations prior to us came from a place of scarcity, right? There wasn't a lot. So it was like you ate what you had. Now we have these huge portions, when back then, and the way my mom was probably raised, was she was probably eating nothing but whole foods, homemade bread, the meat, potatoes, this is what you got, which probably wasn't a lot. And that was the end of it. There was no snacks. There was no dessert. Right? But nowadays, that's totally different. And so we shouldn't be forcing our kids to be eating everything off their plate. It's making for such bad habits that we now have to break.
Yeah, bless you. Really, I'm so grateful there are moms like you out there. And so to overcome that, just because that is such a common struggle, is often to anticipate a sense of grief or sadness if the food is over, if the meal is done, or if you're feeling satisfied, but there's food left on the plate. So sometimes acknowledging, like my clients, when they acknowledge, like, I feel like I'm being a bad girl, or I feel like I'm not listening, or I'm being unappreciative. And sometimes simply feeling that feeling or acknowledging it helps people overcome it. It's a very uncomfortable thing. That's why we put it off. We eat the food anyway to avoid that feeling like a bad girl or like we're being unappreciative. But it's so key in remembering, once you're full, that extra bite, you're not saving anything. You can't even argue that and you enjoy it, because once you're satisfied, your taste buds lose their sensitivity to flavor. So once you're full, that extra food doesn't give you any nutritional benefit either. That's why your body's communicating to stop. So it really is a matter of like honoring that, yeah, we were raised that way and we have this belief, and yeah, it might feel a little sad or uncomfortable if I am to listen to myself, but that's just what it is. It's learning to sit in that discomfort and prioritizing listening to yourself.
I remember listening to a Tony Robbins CD or some sort of, I don't know, someone who was interviewing him. I was listening to something, and this always sticks out in my head, and I tell clients about it. He talks about being raised in a family where you had to finish everything on your plate, or you would, and then that feeling of guilt as an adult if you didn't, and how he was getting heavier and heavier when he was in his 20s, and he was like, wait a sec, I don't need to be eating this much. But the sense of leaving something on his plate didn't feel good to him, and he explains it as the neural pathways, what fires together, wires together. And it was like leaving plate on your food, wired with not feeling very good and feeling guilty, and like there's kids starving out there in the world, and how dare you. And so he said for a month straight, every night at dinner, he would eat only half of his dinner. He'd push his plate away and he'd put music on and dance. And he would celebrate the fact that he only left half the food on his plate. So he could rewire his brain pathways to it being associated with something pleasurable. I was like, that's brilliant.
You gotta love Anthony Robbins. And
you got to.
That's a really clever way to rewire the neural pathways. Absolutely.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people listening are probably like, oh, how do I even go about starting this? Especially for people that have always looked outside their bodies for the answer. They don't trust themselves. So they look for the book, the next best diet, the next best program, the next exercise program, and giving some tools to basically get people started. So can you share with us kind of a few of your favorites to get someone started on this?
Absolutely. I feel like sometimes, because it could be so scary, honestly. So scary to get off the diet and to be on this path of learning how to listen to yourself. And I think that's why a lot of people struggle with this, is they try to do it on their own, especially those of us who have eating issues. Sometimes there may be worth issues as well. So we think I should be able to figure this out by myself, So I want to put a lot of love on you and let you know, like the food thing, having mentorship makes all the difference, because, you don't expect to get a bachelor's without having a bunch of teachers, counselors, doing homework and all that stuff. But we think we're going to heal this food pattern overnight by ourselves, So the first thing I like to say is, seek mentorship and also have an expansive amount of compassion and patience with yourself as you embark in learning how to listen to yourself. The second piece, oftentimes what I recommend with my clients, is not to change anything. Keep your eating as it is, but overlay on top of it the awareness of where you are in your body in terms of hunger and fullness. So a tool I love to use that I talk about in my TEDx talk is that hunger fullness scale. It's a scale that ranges from 0 to 10. It's a way to measure your hunger. 0 correlates with extreme hunger, famished, if you've ever fasted for blood work, or if you're on an extreme diet and you've been fasting all day, that's a 0, totally hungry, on empty. And 10 is totally stuffed after Thanksgiving, and it's painful and you're regretful. So those are the two extremes of that hunger fullness scale. And 5 is right in the middle. It's a feeling of neutralness. So according to this scale, you want to begin when you first get hungry, and that correlates with the 3 or the 4. And it's key to eat when you first get hungry, because that helps you stop when you get comfortably full. It helps you pay attention to your food while you're eating it, helps you make better choices. As for the stopping point, you know when to stop. And with the hunger fullness scale, that correlates with a number 6 or a 7. But you've reached satisfaction when those hunger signals have stopped, when the food no longer tastes as good, or when you notice your mind goes to the next thing. Your mind isn't as interested in the food. You're starting to think about your errands, or you're starting to think about, the the tasks that you have to do, that might cause you to come back and eat more because you don't want to do it. And that's a whole different thing. So I like using awareness of hunger and fullness as you do what you usually do. You don't have to make any changes. And I guess, so the first thing is, seek mentorship. The second thing is, pay attention to your hunger and fullness. And I guess the third thing would be to have compassion and forgiveness for yourself, because cultivating a relationship with your body is a long-term relationship. And if you've ever had a long-term relationship, it takes some learning, it takes some tuning in, asking questions, it takes some forgiveness too. It's hard to get it just right. So I recommend learning to cultivate this relationship with your body, kind of like a relationship, a relationship just like any other.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. I'd like to add a little to that too, because I think with the patience part too, 100%, you have to be patient, because this is, like I said, these are neural pathways that have been burned in your brain and you go down them automatically. So we have to start shifting that awareness and shifting those neural pathways into a new neural, healthier pathway with food. And that takes time. And I would say that even now, I've been on a health journey, I feel like my whole life. It's still something I work on. I don't know about you, Eve. Do you find that you're still, like, there's times where you're kind of going on a bit of a runaway train, you got to pull yourself back?
That's a really interesting question. I've been cultivating, to me nowadays, health means something so different than it did when I was fixated on my food and eating and exercise. It's also come to include things like inner peace, self-trust, breathing deeply. So for me, instead of calling it like my health journey, I'm finding that it's becoming more of a self-attunement journey, and finding new ways to become more aligned with myself, more aligned with my highest vision of myself, and living from there. So it's come to not just be where it once was about eating and exercise, and has come to include how I go about my daily tasks, how I do my work in the highest integrity and in love all day. And I found a sense of well-being and inner peace and lovingness that I've never experienced before. Yes, there are some days where judgment comes in and I'm mad at myself because, I forgot an appointment, or, I forgot to take a gift to this party or whatever. However, I've learned to come to forgive myself quicker and sooner. As for things like eating and exercise, for me, that's become such a loving relationship, such a symbiotic relationship, that there are no longer times where that goes out of alignment anymore as it once had. Yeah. Did that answer the question?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think I'm thinking in my head, like I'm healthy and I eat really well, but then there's times where I see that it's getting away from me, in the sense of I'll be craving sugar a lot more, and I'll have to be like, oh, okay. And it'll go on for like weeks before I kind of click in and go, okay, what's happening here? And it's exactly what you're talking about. It's that then I'm away from my alignment. I'm not aligned. I'm not listening to my stress levels. I'm not taking time for myself, and whatever that looks like for each person is going to be different. But I think that that's such a huge part of it. So I just want to talk about that for a little bit, because it's really, we can give all these great tools about how to listen to our hunger signals, but end of the day, it's like, where are you being fulfilled in your life? Is your spirituality being fulfilled? Are you emotionally fulfilled? Are you happy? Right? Eve?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In my head the whole time. I love
Yeah, I know.
because what begins to happen is my clients and myself obviously see food and what's happening with food as just a metaphor. It's not really about the food. It's, oh, I'm scared of my marriage, what's happening in my marriage, or
yes.
And that might be showing up in the food. So I kind of talk with my clients, and we kind of use like what's happening with food as a flashlight or as an indicator that, hey, something might be going on in another area of life. Don't get me wrong. There's something to be said. I mean, many times clients come to me, even though they're overeating and they're binging and they're so full, they might actually be malnourished. just because there are large gaps in their meals, they're avoiding certain nutrients. So where I begin with my clients is to get them on a regular eating pattern where there are no longer those nutritional deficiencies. And once they've created that pattern and established the pattern, for some people that's basically all that they needed.
Yeah.
However, once they're no longer malnourished, once they're on a sane eating pattern, if cravings do start showing up, we use that as an indicator to do deeper work. What's going on in your life? What's showing up? What could this be representing? And oftentimes clients are so amazed at how quickly they're able to arrive at their own solutions. So I love the example that you gave with the sugar, like, hey, what's going on? And eventually you got to see, oh, my stress levels are out of control. Okay, that makes sense, So that's why it is about the food. Like there has to be, proper nutrition, addressing for the malnourishment, whether it's because people are fasting for long hours during the day, or if people are having, skipping out on important nutrition that their body needs. And it's also using food as an incredible indicator of what might be going on in another area of the life. And it's so incredible because clients might say things like, I was pushing down the brownies. And when I dig a little further, they might share about a story where their feelings were hurt and they were pushing down the tears. And so they'll use the same words to describe, what food with what they're doing with their own emotions. So that's why I was saying, mentorship is so helpful because my ears are designed to hear those types of things and point them out, and helps people along so much quicker,
Yeah, and for anyone that's listening and you've been hopping from one diet to the next and they continually fail, for reasons that you feel are out of control, or you just end up binging again, or the sugar cravings are out of control, then take that as a sign that it's time to not go to the next best diet, but it's time to go inward. And like she said, like, hey, what are you shoving down? What's going on? What else could it be? What's happening in your life? And start to dig a little bit deeper, because the next best diet isn't going to be what works. You definitely have to do the food part, and that's a great starting point. It's like, I always say, let's find your perfect diet, the way you feel comfortable eating, and you don't feel like you're having to use willpower or calorie count in order to sustain it. But if things keep going, you got to start looking past it into these things, right? I think it's so, so important. It's something that women we need to drive it through our heads, because we're looking for that quick fix, as you know, right? And what we're talking about here today, Eve, is takes time, and it takes some energy, and it takes some self-discovery, and kind of maybe even getting rid of some of those ugly, emotions that we've got stored away inside, which not a lot of us want to do, right? We don't like to look at that stuff. They're hidden for a reason.
Isn't that the truth? Yeah. And so I love everything that you're saying. And so, yeah, it's interesting. And I feel like for a woman, I have so much compassion for us, because I feel like part of it, I feel like what you said, the quick fix, but I feel like we're trained to believe that the answers lie outside of ourselves. So we dare not believe that we know our own truth. We dare not believe that we know how to navigate our lives. So that's why I feel like this work is so empowering, and why I feel like it's so necessary for women, because we are connected with the truth in very profound ways. And part of intuitively, we all know that. And so that's why part of our psychology actually rejects dieting, is because it doesn't like to be told what to do. It's actually a very healthy part of ourselves, the autonomous part of ourselves, that when it feels overly controlled, you probably remember this as a teenager. If you feel like somebody's being arbitrarily controlling, what are you going to do? Going to rebel or do the exact opposite. Believe it or not, this also shows up with food. That if somebody has all these arbitrary food rules on themselves, even if they decided to follow these different diets, it's only a matter of time until a voice inside of themselves says, you know what, forget all this, I'm just going to eat what I want. But the way it sounds like is, I know I shouldn't be eating this, but I am. If you ever hear yourself say that, or if you ever hear a friend say that, that's an indicator that their self-autonomy is being threatened, that there's too much arbitrary control. And so, that's why, people go on diets, and when it doesn't work, they blame themselves. They feel like they're defective or something's wrong. But actually, a failure rate, diets fail 95 to 98%, 98% of the time. If it doesn't work, why are we still blaming ourselves? It's kind of like going to Target. I don't know if they have those in Canada. But
we used to. It got taken out, though.
Okay. It's like going to the store and choosing a product that fails 98% of the time. Well, if you choose it and you use it and it doesn't work, first of all, you're not surprised, and you're certainly not blaming yourself. But interestingly, when women go on diets or when people go on diets and it doesn't work, the person that we blame is ourselves. We say we're not strong enough, we lack willpower, or that we suck, or we're too young, or we're too old, or whatever. But it's actually inherent to food restriction. Even if it's self-imposed, will cause cravings, will cause obsession with food, and will cause overeating. So this dieting is causing exactly the things that we're trying to handle and to solve. And that's what's so frustrating for so many people.
Yes, thank you. It's so true. And it's just like, and we have so much pressure on us to live up to these standards for women that are being bombarded in our faces all the time, that we get desperate. Women are desperate. They're just like, oh my gosh, I just want to lose weight. I need to look this way. And so I'm going to follow this diet or that diet. But yeah, 95% of them fail, which is just like the worst. And 90% or more of women dislike their bodies. So we know that 90% of women are probably then dieting and failing at it. Terrible.
It's such a challenging cycle. And so that's why, in the work that I do with my clients is to help them become their healthiest, leanest self. Not looking like somebody else. They're probably not going to have bones jutting out. They're not going to look like a supermodel. The supermodel doesn't look like a supermodel. She's totally photoshopped, So it's not about becoming somebody else. It's becoming the best you at that stage of your life, at that time, with all the things that are happening then. And it's really incredible to see women no longer chasing after a standard, no longer trying to be somebody else, but instead basking in the glory of themselves. It's really quite remarkable, when people are done doing this work, they can't imagine ever, doing things in a way that's not aligned with their higher self. They can't even imagine doing any form of self-harm, like exercising when they're tired or injured, or restricting food when they know they're actually hungry, because they're no longer willing to, treat themselves with such harshness and insensitivity.
Insensitivity. Yeah, I think that's right.
I could talk about this all day. I get so
Me too. Yeah. I love it. We're eye to eye on this, Eve. I hear you. There needs to be more of people like you and I spreading the word. And I always say the path that you and I choose to go down isn't as sexy and as like glamorous as lose 10 pounds in 21 days. Following this diet. It's like we're the ones that are like, actually, you got to work at it. You got to dig deep.
Yeah.
It doesn't sell quite as nicely sometimes as the other stuff does, but this is what needs to happen. And so if somebody's listening to this and they want to work with you, tell us where they can find you.
Okay, yeah, please. I'd love to hear from you. My website is vitamineve.com. It's spelled VITAMINEVE, like my name, Eve, .com. And you could reach out to me. I have an ebook, Stop Overeating Now. And, or you could shoot me an email and we could schedule a complimentary food freedom session. So I'd love to hear from you. So those would be the best ways.
And listen to her TEDx talks. I'm going to put all the links in the show notes for her site, and her TEDx talks was excellent. So thank you so much, Eve, for coming on today and speaking with us.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure. And to everybody out there, thank you for watching. Trust your hunger. Make peace with food.